So here's a puzzle for you. How does one of the most powerful, most controlling political parties in the world deal with power that it doesn't directly command? We're talking about everyone from billionaire tech moguls to underground churches and even criminal gangs. The Chinese Communist Party is constantly facing this question: what do you do with independent power? Let's dive in and break down their very complex and often really contradictory strategy. Okay, check out this quote. At first glance, it might not seem like a huge deal, but then you realize who said it. That's Deng Xiaoping, the paramount leader of China, the guy who basically engineered its economic miracle. And he's talking about the triads, as in notorious organized crime syndicates. For a communist party that is all about order and control, that statement is just wild. It's a massive contradiction, and it perfectly sets up the paradox we're going to explore. So that gets us to the big question of this explainer. How on earth did a party that was born from a bloody fight against gangster-backed nationalists, a party that spent decades trying to wipe out organized crime, how did they come to see these very same groups as useful or even patriotic allies? The answer, it turns out, reveals a fascinating two-faced strategy for holding on to power. All right, to get our heads around this, first we have to look inside China itself. And here, the party's rule is simple. It's absolute. There can be no rival centers of power. Period. That's not a suggestion, it's the bedrock principle of their government, and it is enforced with an iron fist.
And look, this is not some new policy. The party has a very long and very painful memory. Back in 1927, Shanghai's infamous Green Gang helped the nationalists slaughter thousands of communists, almost wiping them out in the cities. So when Mao came to power in 1949, one of the very first things he did was a totally ruthless purge of all organized crime. And that policy is alive and well today under Xi Jinping with these huge campaigns like Sweep Away Black. For 100 years, the message has been consistent. Inside China, organized crime is an enemy of the state.
Now, what's really crucial to understand about these modern campaigns is that they're not just busting gangsters. They're explicitly going after the corrupt party officials who give them protective umbrellas. This tells you everything. The party sees the real threat as this potential alliance between criminals and its own officials, because that's a direct challenge to its central control.
And, this iron fist isn't just for mobsters. It reaches all the way up to the highest levels of business. I mean, think about Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. He was the global face of Chinese tech genius. But after he dared to publicly criticize state regulators, poof, he vanished from public view for months. His company's gigantic IPO was killed, and Alibaba got slammed with a record-breaking fine. The lesson was sent loud and clear to every other billionaire. Your power only exists because the party allows it.
You see the exact same logic playing out with social and spiritual power. Unregistered house churches have drawn in millions of followers, creating these large, organized communities completely outside of state supervision. To the party, that's an unacceptable threat. A perfect example is the early reign Covenant Church in Chengdu. They had their own school, their own seminary, and in 2018, they were raided, shut down, and their leaders thrown in prison.
So it all boils down to a brutally simple calculation inside China. If a group, doesn't matter if it's a company, a church, or a gang, is sanctioned and controlled by the state, okay, it can exist. But if it operates independently, it's automatically seen as a threat to the party's monopoly on power, and sooner or later, it will be crushed.
Okay, but here's the twist. This is where the paradox really kicks into high gear. The second you step outside the borders of mainland China, that iron fist often gets swapped for a velvet glove. The entire strategy of crushing independent groups gets flipped completely on its head. Now, if you want to understand this bizarre switch, you have to know about a concept called the United Front. This is a century-old Leninist strategy that the Chinese Communist Party has absolutely perfected. It's basically a policy of identifying and recruiting any group or person outside the party who can be useful for achieving its goals. And as you're about to see, their definition of useful can be shockingly broad. Let's take Hong Kong as a case study. During the massive 2019 pro-democracy protests, something shocking happened at the Yuen Long train station. Mobs of men in white T-shirts, who were widely believed to be Triad members, just started randomly attacking protesters and regular commuters with metal rods. It was a blatant act of political terror, but it gave the authorities plausible deniability. The gangs did the dirty work for them. And if you think that's wild, it gets even more blatant over in Taiwan. Get this, there's a guy nicknamed White Wolf, a former boss in the notorious Bamboo Union gang. He now runs a political party that openly pushes for unification with China. His group, which is allegedly funded by Beijing, uses its gangster members to physically attack and harass pro-independence activists. It's a textbook case of using a criminal proxy to push a political agenda abroad.
And this isn't just a regional thing. This strategy goes global. Take Wan Kwok-koi, the infamous macaw triad boss they call Broken Tooth. He gets out of prison and reinvents himself as a patriotic businessman. He starts an association to promote China's Belt and Road Initiative, the huge global infrastructure project. But under that patriotic cover, U.S. authorities say his network is tied to a massive criminal empire, involved in everything from human trafficking to crypto scams.
So we have this stark contrast, right? Ruthless suppression at home, cynical alliances abroad. But for this paradox to even work, the party has to have absolute, unquestioned dominance on its home turf. So how exactly do they maintain that level of control? Let's break down the mechanics.
It really rests on 4 interconnected pillars: deep political infiltration, the power of legal suppression, pervasive high-tech surveillance, and really tight ideological control. You put those 4 things together, and you create a system where no independent power has much of a chance to survive. So let's just take that first pillar, infiltration. Get this number, it's pretty staggering. 100%. That's the percentage of China's top 500 private companies that have internal Communist Party committees. And these aren't just social clubs. They are getting more and more involved in big corporate decisions, making sure that even private business ultimately serves the party's interests. No company is ever truly independent.
And this right here, this whole idea of a protective umbrella, really shows you the paradox in a nutshell. Inside China, if you're an official who provides a protective umbrella to criminals, that is a career-ending, go-to-jail crime. It's a threat to party control. But abroad, the party itself can act as the ultimate protective umbrella, shielding so-called patriotic gangsters who are useful to its agenda. And that brings us right back to our central theme. Look, this isn't hypocrisy. It's a deeply pragmatic, consistent strategy. The only goal is preserving and extending the party's power. The tactics just change depending on where you are. And if you need one thing to perfectly capture this split personality, just look at these 2 quotes. They're both from China's top security officials, just separated by a few decades. At home, the order is to strike forcefully and crack down. But when talking about groups abroad, the tune changes to we should unite with them, even Triad members, as long as they're patriotic. It's one state with 2 completely different rulebooks.
So what's the bottom line here? It's actually pretty simple. For the Chinese Communist Party, the one and only guiding principle is absolute control. Everything else is just a tactic. Inside its borders, any independent source of power is a threat that must be eliminated. But outside its borders, any group, no matter how shady, can be a useful tool to be co-opted if it serves the party's strategic interests.
Which leaves us with a final, really critical question. As China's influence continues to grow around the world, what does it mean for the rest of us when a major global power is perfectly willing to use deniable, non-state actors, from tech giants to criminal syndicates, to achieve its political goals? How does that fundamentally change the rules of the game for international security and politics?